Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today, we are continuing our series on reading the journals of Emerson. We are up to Journal 14, subtitled The Wide World Number 13, and it begins in Canterbury, February 17th, 1824. There is a short quotation by Pascal. However, the edition that I'm reading has no translation of it. And based on the breadth of what we are doing, which is reading all of the journals of Emerson, I have made the sacrifice of not hunting down every single foreign language quotation that Emerson slips into his journals because it would just take forever and we'd never get done with this. So, wherever there is Greek, Latin, German, French, something that I do not know, I will merely state that it says something there and then keep going. And those of you that really want to know what it is that Emerson wrote, you can obviously find them in the printed copies or even online in public domain. What I'm reading from is public domain. So, with that said, I'll go ahead and keep going. The first entry, as I said, is from Canterbury, February 17th, 1824, and it begins with a quotation by Pascal. However, we're going to skip that and keep going. And Sir J. Mackintosh calls the sentence the sublimest of human composition. It is unfortunate and happy, but a sublimity not difficult to gain, as it did not occur to Pascal when he first revolved the subject, but as the last generalization at which he arrives. And it is easier to build up one subject into a cone with a broad base of examples narrowing up into a formula expressing a general truth, than to detach subtle facts from subjects partially known. Emerson changes the subject to praise. Please to praise me is the ill-disguised request of almost all literary men. All men are cheered by applause and vexed by censure. Then there is a quotation in Latin by Juvenal. We'll skip over that. But literary men alone cannot do without it. The reason is obvious. Other men toil for gold and get gold for their toil, but scholars cannot get gold, and appetite in them craves another food. They are no more insatiable for their proper reward than are the pursuers of mammon for theirs. But why are the askers of praise ridiculous, and not the askers of silver? In education, it seems to be safer to praise than to censure abundantly. For myself, I have ever been elated to an active mind by flattery, and depressed by dispraise. Perhaps a muse that soared on a stronger wing would scorn to be so slightly disheartened. I feel like the lines, quote, praise is the salt that seasons right in man and whets the appetite of moral good, end quote, by Young. It is noticeable how much a man is judged of by the praise he gives. It is best not to be too inflammable, not to be lavish of your praise on light occasions, for it will be remembered long after your fervent admiration has cooled into disgust. Milton was very frugal of his praise. A man is not more known by the company he keeps. Here follows another series of words in Latin. Dash is a decisive index of perverted character. Emerson changes the subject to inventions. Pliny's uncle had a slave read while he ate. In the progress of Watt and Perkins's philosophy, the day may come when the scholar shall be provided with a reading steam engine, when he shall say presto, and it shall discourse eloquent history, and stop sesame, and it shall hush to let him think. He shall put in a pen and hear poetry, and 2 pens to hear a song. That age will discover Laputa. February 20th. Tout commence, says Father Bousset of the First Ages. All has the air of beginning. They form societies, devise arts, polish manners, and make laws. This return to the cradle is useful. Now, when all things are tried and trite, when Shem, Ham, and Japheth have strayed from their paternal tent as far as the limits of the globe will let them, and on the mind of each is writ in indelible lines his character, Now the spirit of humanity finds it curious and good to leave the armchair of its old age and go back to the scenes of Auld Lang Syne, to the old mansion house of Asia, the playground of its childhood, the land of distant but cherished remembrance. That spot must needs be dear where faculties first opened, where youth first triumphed in the elasticity of strength and spirits, and where the ways of civilization and thought, then deemed infinite, were first explored. It brings the mind palpable relief to withdraw it from the noisy and overgrown world to these peaceful primeval solitudes. For this reason, perhaps, there is a species of grandeur in Premier Epoch of Bossuet, though it relates a threadbare tale. It may be this emotion will be only occasionally felt, for though the grandeur is real, it is ever present as the firmament is forever magnificent, but is only felt to be so when our own spirits are fresh and buoyant. Asia, Africa, Europe, old, leprous, and wicked, have run round the goal of centuries till we are tired, and they are ready to drop. But now a strong man has entered the race, and is outstripping them all. Strong man, youth and glory are with thee. As thou wouldst prosper, forget not the hope of mankind. Trample not upon thy competitors, though unworthy. Europe is thy father. Bear him on thy Atlantean shoulders. Asia, thy grandsire, regenerate him. Africa, their ancient, abused bondsman, give him his freedom. Emerson changes subjects to Auld Lang Syne. In the beginning, which I spake of a few lines above, there was some good. Would it not have been well to have lived in Nineveh, or to have been the mighty hunter, or to have floated on the deluge, or have been dead before? Hope, at least, would have been a contemporary. Now she has long been dead, or doting, as good as dead. Moreover, men's thoughts were their own then. Noah was not done to death with Aristotle and Bacon in Greece and Rome. The patriarchs were never puzzled with libraries of names and dates, with first ages and dark ages, and revivals, and upper empires and lower empires, with the balance of power and the balance of trade, with fighting chronologies and dagger-drawing creeds. Life is wasted in the necessary preparation of finding which is the true way, and we die just as we enter it. An antediluvian had the advantage, an advantage that has been growing scarce as the world has grown older, of forming his own opinion and indulging his own hope without danger of contradiction from time that never had elapsed or observation that never had been made. Emerson now writes, Nowadays Education. Unknown troubles perplex the lot of the scholar whose inexpressible unhappiness it is to be born at this day. He is born in a time of war. 1,000 religions are in arms. Systems of education are contesting. Literature, politics, morals, and physics are each engaged in loud civil broil. A chaos of doubts besets him from his outset. Shall he read or shall he think? Ask the wise. The wise have not determined. Shall he nourish his faculties in solitude or in active life? No man can answer. He turns to books, the vast amount of recorded wisdom, but it is useless from its amount. He cannot read all, no, not in Methuselah's multiplied days. But how to choose? Hoc opus est. Must he read history and neglect morals, or learn what ought to be in ignorance of what has been? Or must he slight both in pursuit of physical science, or all for practical knowledge and a profession? Must he, in a last alternative, abandon all the rest to be profoundly skilled in a single branch of art, or understanding none smatter superficially in all? A question of equal moment to each new citizen of the world is this: shall I subdue my mind by discipline, or obey its native inclinations? Govern my imagination with rules, or cherish its originality? Shall I cultivate reason or fancy? Educate one power with a concentrated diligence, or reduce all to the same level? These and similar questions are a real and recurring calamity. I do not know that it were extravagant to say that half of the time of most scholars is dissipated in fruitless and vexatious attempts to solve one or another of such questions in succession. It is an evil oftener felt than stated. It is an evil that demands a remedy. It requires that master minds have done for some of the sciences should be done for education. Teach us no more arts, but how those which we already should be learned. February 20th. Material beauty perishes or palls. Intellectual beauty limits admiration to seasons and ages, hath its ebbs and flows of delight. But moral beauty is lovely, imperishable, perfect. It is dear to the child and to the patriarch, to heaven, angel, man. None that can understand Milton's Comus can read it without warming to the holy emotions it panegyirizes. I would freely give all I ever hoped to be, even when my air-blown hopes were brilliant and glorious, not as now, to have given down that sweet strain to posterity to do good in a golden way. The service that such book as this, and the Prelati and Bunyan, etc., render is not appreciable, but it is immense. These books go up and down the world on the errand of charity. They pluck away the thorn from virtue's martyr crown, and plant the rose and amaranth instead. Of this I am glad. I am glad to find at least one unfading, essential, beneficent principle in human nature, the approval of right, and that is so strong and ineffaceable. Popular preachers have won the understanding by getting on the right side of the heart. I am ignorant if, in saying this, I analyze Bancroft's eloquence. His sermon on temperance was of powerful effect, but it seemed to reach the practice through an appeal to this moral poetry. Thus, one fine sentiment in it, that was calculated to produce much fasting, was the representation of the body as the corruptible and perishable channel through which flowed for a season the streams of immortal thought. Canterbury, February 22nd, 1824. The war between sentiment and reason is the perpetual wonder that lasts the quote-unquote 9 days of human life. When we calmly think and precisely reason, our life, ever enigmatical now, has most of sense and design. There is an arrangement perceived in education and a growth in mind. But when we feel strongly, when we love woman or man, when we hope or fear or hate or aspire with vehemence, the strength of a sentiment is so engrossing and exclusive that it throws all memory and habit for the moment into a remote background. The delusion waxes so strong that it alone remains real, and all else shows a strong delusion. An educated man, when he is star-gazing, or vividly considering for a moment his relations as an eternal being to the world, frequently undervalues, as nugatory, the time and diligence bestowed by him on science and art, forgetting that to this very cultivation he owes that elevation of thought which disgusts him with this world's unsatisfactoriness. A melancholy dream it is, this succession of rolling weeks, each like the last in peevish dissatisfaction and diminished hope. Quote, by pain of heart, now checked and now impelled, the intellectual power through the words and things went sounding on a dim and perilous way. End quote. Canterbury, February 1824, and here follows a poem. Goodbye, proud world, I'm going home. Thou art not my friend, and I'm not thine. Long I've been tossed like the salt sea foam, all day mid weary crowds I roam, and O my home, O holy home. Goodbye to flattery's fawning face, to grandeur with his wise grimace, to upstart wealth's averted eye, to supple office low and high, to frozen hearts and hasting feet, to noisy toil, to court and street. To those who go and those who come, goodbye, proud world, I'm going home. I'm going to my own hearthstone, bosomed in yon green hills alone. Sweet summer birds are warbling there. Metaphysicians are mortified to find how entirely the whole materials of understanding are derived from sense. No man is understood who speculates on mind or character until he borrows the emphatic imagery of sense. A mourner will try in vain to explain the extent of his bereavement better than to say a chasm is opened in society. I fear the progress of metaphysical philosophy may be found to consist in nothing else than the progressive introduction of opposite metaphors. Thus the Platonists congratulated themselves for ages upon their knowing that mind was a dark chamber whereon ideas like shadows were painted. Men derided this as infantile when they afterwards learned that the mind was a sheet of white paper whereon any and all characters might be written. Almost everything in language that is bound up in your memory is of this significant sort. Sleep, the cessation of toil, the loss of volition, etc., what is that? But, quote, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, is felt. Life is nothing but the lamp of life that blazes, flutters, and goes out, the hill of life which is climbed and tottered down, the race of life which is run with 1,000 competitors, and for a prize proposed. These are distinctly understood. Quote, we love tellers of good tidings, is faint, but, how beautiful upon the mountains are their feet, is excellent. Quote, the world is the scaffold of divine justice, is Saurin. Emerson talks of country. How do you do, sir? Very well, sir. You have a keen air among your rocks and hills. Yes, sir, I never saw a country which more delighted me. A man might travel many hundred miles, and not find so fine woodlands as abound in this neighborhood. But the good people who live in them do not esteem them. It is people born in town who are intoxicated with being in the country. It certainly is a good deal like being drunk, the feelings of a kid in the hills. In Cambridge there is some wild land called Sweet Auburn, upwards of a mile from the colleges, and yet the students will go in bands over a flat sandy road, and in summer evenings the woods are full of them. They are so happy they do not know what to do. They will scatter far and wide, too, among some insignificant whortleberry bushes, pricked with thorns and stung by mosquitoes for hours for the sake of picking a pint of berries, occasionally chewing a bug of indescribable bad relish. You count it nothing more to go among green bushes than on the roads, but those who have been educated in dusty streets enjoy as much sauntering here as you would in the orange groves and cinnamon gardens of the East Indies. They say there is a tune which is forbidden to be played in the European armies because it makes the Swiss desert, since it reminds them so forcibly of their hills and home. I have heard many Swiss tunes played in college. Balancing between getting and not getting a hard lesson, a breath of fragrant air from the fields coming into the window would serve as a Swiss tune and make me desert to the glens from which it came. Nor is that vagabond inclination wholly gone yet. In many a sultry afternoon last summer I left my Latin and my English to go with my gun and see the rabbits and squirrels and robins in the woods. Goodbye, sir. Stop a moment. I have heard a clergyman of Maine say that in his parish are the Penobscot Indians, and that when any of them in summer has been absent for some weeks a-hunting, he comes back among them a different person, and altogether unlike any of the rest, with an eagle's eye, a wild look, and commanding carriage and gesture. But after a few weeks it wears off again into the indolent drone-like apathy which all exhibit. Good day, sir. Emerson talks of the Puritans' melioration of the type. Such a change as Hume remarks to have taken place in men's mind about the reign of James I may be found also perhaps in a complete observation of the early and later books of this country. The race who fought the Revolution out were obviously not of the same temper and manners as the first comers to the wilderness. They had dropped so much of the Puritanism of their sires that they would hardly have been acknowledged by them as sound members of their rigorous society. This nation is now honorably distinguished above all other for great moral purity. But the constant intercourse with Europe constantly lessens the distinction, and liberality of religious and political sentiment gains ground rapidly. The great men of our first age were Bradford, Standish, Cotton, Winthrop, Phillips, and Underwood. Of our second, the Mathers, John Eliot, Witherspoon, and President Edwards, and of the third, Otis, Adams, Washington, Franklin, Smith of Virginia would not have been admitted to the Plymouth doors, unless perchance on account of the slaughter of the three Saracens. Liberality of religion and of politics do not always go hand in hand. For the same Puritans who framed the English Constitution persecuted the Quakers and hanged the witches. The adventurous spirit which distinguished the settlers was begotten by the fanaticism of the Reformation, a spirit which confides in its own strength for the accomplishment of its ends and disdains to calculate the chance of failure. It is strange, gratifying, to see how faithfully the feelings of one generation may be propagated to another amid the adverse action of all outward circumstances, poverty, riches, revolution. From the close of the Elizabeth's reign, the intolerance and bigotry of the Puritans continued and multiplied until the outbreak in England in 1640, and in the branch of the stock in America, and the ecclesiastical tyranny. After that effervescence, men corrected their faults of inexperience, and the following generation here were more marked by good sense. Gibbon said 'twas as rare as genius. Here follows a poem titled The Blackbird. The blackbird's song is in my ear, a summer sound I leap to hear. Day breaks through yonder dusky cloud, o'er well-known cliffs those giants proud, and I am glad the day is come to greet me in my ancient home. Rejoice with me, melodious bird, whose merry note my childhood heard. For I've come back again to see the wild woods of mine infancy. For, O my home, I thought no more. I loved the voice of the bird, and the trees where he builds his nest, and the grove where man's mirth and man's grief are unheard. Ye are my home, ye ancient rocks, who lift mid cedar shades your rugged crest. The flowers, like beauty's golden locks, adorn your brow and droop upon your breast. Mountain and cliff and lake, I am your child. Ye were the cradle of mine infancy, the playground of my youth. He who frequents these scenes where nature discloses her magnificence to silence and solitude will have his mind occupied often by trains of thought of peculiarly solemn tone, which never interrupted the profligacy of libertines, the money-getting of the miser, or the glory-getting of the ambitious. In the depths of the forest, where the noon comes like twilight on the cliff in the cavern, and by the lonely lake, where the sounds of man's mirth and man's sorrows were never heard, where the squirrel inhabits the voice of the bird echoes, is a shrine which few visit in vain, an oracle which returns no ambiguous response. The pilgrim who retires hither wonders how his heart could ever cleave so mightily to the world, whose deafening tumult he has left behind. What are temples and towered cities to him? He has come to a sweeter and more desirable creation. When his eye reaches upward by the sides of the piled rocks to the grassy summit, he feels that the magnificence of man is quelled and subdued here. The very leaf under his foot, the little flowers that embroider his path, outdo the art and outshine the glory of man. Things here assume their natural proportions before distorted by prejudice. What, in this solitude, are the libraries of learning? The scholar and the peasant are alike in the view which nature takes of them. The barriers of artificial distinction are broken down. Society's iron scepter of ceremony is dishonored here. Here in the footsteps of the invisible, in the bright ruins of the original creation, over which the morning stars sang together, and where even now they shed their sweetest light. Whatsoever beings watch over these inner chambers of nature, they have not abandoned their charge. Nature never tires of her house, and each of its glorious tapestry is newly hung. Emerson changes subjects to Young America's Judgments. Youth is not the fault of nations soonest mend, and it may be very long before the world's experience can be anywise pronounced mature. What are we who sit in judgment upon our fathers, as if upon a remote and foreign race? Their stripling progeny, inhabiting their hearths, covered with the dust of their prejudices, dressed in their robes and using their wealth. When hundreds of ages shall have rolled away and the scholar's eye shall combine the entire history of 1,000 nations in one view, it will be less immodest and more easy to pronounce on the merits of their respective literatures. It will correct our vain pretensions to read often Franklin's scrap called Ephemeris. The following is from a letter to Miss Emerson, March 21st, 1824. No fashion is so frantic as to depreciate thought. No change of times or minds has ever occurred to throw too much intellect on the market. The world is very poor amidst the rich library of all knowledge. Its vaunting children have bequeathed it. Now in its ripe and learned old age, come I, its docile child, to be pleased and instructed by its abundant wisdom. But when I open its accepted gospels of thought and learning, its sages and bards, I find they were all fain to spin a spider thread of intellect, to borrow much of each other, to arrive at a few results, and to hide or supply meagreness by profuse ornament. I am therefore curious to know what living wit, not perverted by the vulgar rage of writing a book, has suggested or concluded upon the dark sayings and sphinx riddles of philosophy and life. I do beseech your charity not to withhold your pen. I have one more calculation, with which I please myself, that if my gross body outlive you, you will bequeath me the legacy of all your recorded thought. I know not to what purpose you should think and write so many years, pardon the coarseness of the phrase, if you design to burn or bury your books, like Prospero. 'Tis counted good in the Greek and the Roman to have planted so many fair flowers of fancy on the open road of poetry, for the use and pleasure of all the subsequent travelers. He who makes one addition to the stock of thought in circulation among men is a benefactor to an unknown amount, and has not lost his day. If you are too proud to expose the mind's wealth to the vulgar voice of fame, as de Stael has done, you do philanthropy a wrong, and friendship a wrong, to withhold it from men and from a friend. And what will you want of it where you go? Says Faith, if you are to lie for a season in cold obstruction, it will rot by your side. If you wake in glorified existence, you will cease to value these rudiments of the soul. But cast your bread on the waters, and you will find it after many days. You may find it in the other worlds bearing fruit and multiplying, as in the nature of thought. Why is the fruit of knowledge sorrow? I have, it may be, a pleasant poetical cast of thought, because I am ignorant. I had a pleasanter and more romantic existence, for such is childhood, whilst I thought the rainbow a symbol of an arch in heaven, and not necessary results of lights and eyes, whilst I believed that the country had some essential sacredness, some nobler difference from the town than one that was builded, the other not. A flower and a butterfly lose every charm when pouring science discloses lobes and stomach acids and alkalis in their delicate beauty. I dislike to augment my slender store of chemistry and astronomy, and I think I could have helped the monks to belabor Galileo for saying the everlasting earth moved. Now these few lines are an epitome of the history of knowledge. Every step science has made, was it not the successive destruction of agreeable delusions which jointly made up no mean portion of human happiness? In metaphysics, quote, the gymnastics of the soul, unquote, what has reason done since Plato's day but rend and tear his gorgeous fabric? And how are we the wiser? Instead of the unmeasurable theater, which we deemed was here open to the range of the understanding, we are now reduced to a little circle of definitions and logic round which we may humbly run. And how has faith fared? Why, the reformer's axe has hewed down idol after idol, and corruption and imperfection, until faith is bare and very cold. And they have not done stripping yet, but must reach the bone. The old fable said truth was by gods or men made naked. I wish the gods would help her to a garment or make her fairer. From Eden to America, the apples of the tree of knowledge are but bitter fruit in the end. Sunday, April 18th, 1824. There is a Latin quotation by Horace. I am beginning my professional studies. In a month I shall be legally a man, and I deliberately dedicate my time, my talents, and my hopes to the church. Man is an animal that looks before and after, and I should be loath to reflect at a remote period that I took so solemn a step in my existence without some careful examination of my past and present life. Since I cannot alter, I would not repent the resolution I have made, and this page must be witness to the latest year of my life, whether I have good grounds to warrant my determination. I cannot dissemble that my abilities are below my ambition, and I find that I judge by a false criterion when I measure my powers by my ability to understand and to criticize the intellectual character of another. For men graduate their respect not by the secret wealth, but by the outward use, not by the power to understand, but by the power to act. I have, or had, a strong imagination, and consequently a keen relish for the beauties of poetry. The exercise which the practice of composition gives to this faculty is the cause of my immoderate fondness for writing, which has swelled these pages to a voluminous extent. My reasoning faculty is proportionably weak, nor can I ever hope to write a Butler's Analogy or an essay of Hume. Nor is it strange that with this confession I should choose the theology which is from everlasting to everlasting debatable ground. For the highest species of reasoning upon divine subjects is rather the fruit of a sort of moral imagination than of the reasoning machines such as Locke, Clarke, and David Hume. Dr. Channing's Dudleyan lecture is the model of what I mean, and the faculty which produced this is akin to the higher flights of the fancy. I may add that the preaching most in vogue at the present day depends chiefly on the imagination for its success, and asks those accomplishments which I believe are most within my grasp. I have set down little which can gratify my vanity, and I must further say that every comparison of myself with my mates that 6 or 7, perhaps 16 or 17 years have made, has convinced me that there exists a signal defect of character which neutralizes in great part the just influence my talents ought to have. Whether that defect be in the address, in the fault of good forms, which Queen Isabella said were like perpetual letters commendatory, or deeper seated in an absence of common sympathies, or even in a levity of the understanding, I cannot tell. But its bitter fruits are a sore uneasiness in the company of most men and women, a frigid fear of offending and jealousy of disrespect, an inability to lead and an unwillingness to follow the current conversation, which contrive to make me second with all those among whom chiefly I wish to be first. Hence my bearing in the world is the direct opposite of that good-humored independence and self-esteem which should make the gentleman. Be it here remembered that there is a decent pride which is conspicuous in the perfect model of a Christian man. I am unfortunate also, as was Rienzi, in a propensity to laugh, or rather snicker. I am ill at ease, therefore, among men. I criticize with hardness, I lavishly applaud, I weakly argue, and I wonder with a foolish face of praise. Now the profession of law demands a good deal of personal address, and impregnable confidence in one's own power upon all occasions expected and unexpected, and a logical mode of thinking and speaking, which I do not possess, and may not reasonably hope to obtain. Medicine also makes large demands on the practitioner for a seducing mannerism, and I have no taste for the pestle and mortar, for Bell on the bones, or Hunter, or Celsus. But in divinity I hope to thrive. I inherit from my sire a formality of manner and speech, but I derive from him, or his patriotic parent, a passionate love for the strains of eloquence. I burn after something immense and infinite which Cicero desired. What we ardently love we learn to imitate. My understanding venerates, and my heart loves that cause which is dear to God and man, the laws of morals, the revelations which sanction, and the blood of martyrs and triumphant suffering of the saints which seal them. In my better hours I am the believer, if not the dupe, of brilliant promises, and can respect myself as the possessor of those powers which command the reason and passions of the multitude. The office of a clergyman is twofold: public preaching and private influence. Entire success in the first is the lot of few, but this I am encouraged to expect. If, however, the individual himself lack the moral worth which is to secure the last, his studies upon the first are idly spent. The most prodigious genius, a seraph's eloquence, will shamefully defeat its own end. if it has not first won the heart of the defender to the cause he defends. But the coolest reason cannot censure my choice when I oblige myself professionally to a life which all wise men freely and advisedly adopt. I put no great restraint on myself, and can therefore claim little merit in a manner of life which chimes with inclination and habit. But I would learn to love virtue for her own sake. I would have my pen so guided as was Milton's when a deep and enthusiastic love of goodness and of God dictated the Comus to the bard, or that prose rhapsody in the third book of a prelude. I would sacrifice inclination to the interest of mind and soul. I would remember that spare fast oft with God's doth diet, that Justinian devoted but 1 out of 24 hours to sleep, and this week, for instance, I will remember to curtail my dinner and supper sensibly, and rise from table each day with an appetite till Tuesday evening next, and so see if it be a fact that I can understand more clearly. I have mentioned a defect of character. Perhaps it is not one, but many. Every wise man aims at an entire conquest of himself. We applaud, as possessed of extraordinary good sense, one who never makes the slightest mistake in speech or action, one in whom not only every important step of life, but every passage of conversation, every duty of the day, even every movement of every muscle, hands, feet, and tongue, are measured and dictated by deliberate reason. I am not assuredly that excellent creature. A score of words and deeds issue from me daily, of which I am not the master. They are begotten of weakness and born of shame. I cannot assume the elevation I ought, but lose the influence I should exert among those of meaner or younger understanding, for want of sufficient bottom in my nature, for want of that confidence of manner which springs from an erect mind, which is without fear and without reproach. In my frequent humiliation, even before women and children, I am compelled to remember the poor boy who cried, "I told you, father, they would find me out." Even those feelings which are counted noble and generous take in me the taint of frailty. For my strong propensity to friendship, instead of working out its manly ends, degenerates to a fondness for particular casts of feature, perchance not unlike the doting of old King James. Stateliness and silence hang very like Mocha's suspicious silver veil, only concealing what is best not shown. What is called a warm heart I have not. The stern accuser, conscience, cries that the catalogue of confessions is not yet full. I am a lover of indolence and of the belly, and the good have a right to ask the neophyte who wears this garment of scarlet sin, why he comes where all are apparelled in white. Dares he hope that some patches of pure and generous feeling, some bright fragments of lofty thought, it may be of divine poesy, shall charm the eye away from all the party-colored shades of his character? And when he is clothed in the vestments of the priest, and has inscribed on his forehead, "Holiness to the Lord," and wears on his breast the breastplate of the tribes, then can the Ethiopian change his skin, and the unclean be pure? Or how shall I strenuously enforce on men the duties and habits to which I am a stranger? Physician, heal thyself. I need not go far for an answer to so natural a question. I am young in my everlasting existence. I already discern the deep dye of elementary errors, which threaten to color its infinity of duration, and I judge that if I devote my nights and days in form, into the service of God and the war against sin, I shall soon be prepared to do the same in substance. I cannot accurately estimate my chances of success in my profession and in life. Were it just to judge the future from the past, they would be very low. In my case, I think it is not. I have never expected success in my present employment. My scholars are carefully instructed, my money is faithfully earned, but the instructor is little wiser, and the duties were never congenial with my disposition. Thus far the dupe of hope, I have trudged on with my bundle at my back, and my eye fixed on the distant hill where my burden would fall. It may be I shall write dupe a long time to come, and the end of life shall intervene betwixt me and the release. My trust is that my profession shall be my regeneration of mind, manners, inward and outward estate, or rather my starting point, for I have hoped to put in eloquence as a robe, and by goodness and zeal and the awfulness of virtue to press and prevail over the false judgments, the rebel passions, and corrupt habits of men. We blame the past, we magnify and gild the future, and are not wiser for the multitude of days. Spin on ye the adamantine spindle, spin on my fragile thread. Here is a poem entitled Continuation of Goodbye Proud World. I'm going to my hearthstone, bosomed in yon green hills alone, a secret shrine in a pleasant land, whose groves the frolic fairies planned. Their twilight shade each summer day echoes the blackbird's roundelay, and vulgar crowds have never trod a spot that is sacred to mind and God. Oh, when I am safe in my sylvan home, I tread on my pride of Greece and Rome. And when I am stretched beneath the pines, where the evening star so wholly shines, I laugh at the lore and the pride of man, and the sophist schools and the learned clan. For what are they all in their high conceit, when a man in the bush with God may meet? Here is another called Today. I rake no coffined clay, nor publish wide the resurrection of departed pride. Safe in their ancient crannies, dark and deep, let kings and conquerors, saints and soldiers sleep. Late in the world, too late perchance for fame, just late enough to reap abundant blame. I choose a novel theme, a bold abuse of critic charters and unlaureled muse. Of mouldy men and books and names and lands, disgust my reason and defile my hands. I had as lief respect an ancient shoe as love old things for age and hate the new. I spurn the past, my mind disdains its nod, nor kneels in homage to so mean a god. I laugh at those who, while they gape and gaze, the bald antiquity of China praise. Youth is, whatever cynic tubs pretend, the fault that boys and nations soonest mend. And here is an annotated insertion by the editors. The following extracts from letters written by Miss Mary Emerson to her nephew and his to her in reply should properly be introduced here. They are taken from his journal or extract book number 18 2D. Mr. Emerson, in his account of his revered aunt, lectures and biographical sketches, says, quote, "She had the misfortune of spinning with a greater velocity than any of the other tops," end quote, in ordinary motion, in conversation, in thought. So in her writing, her thought leaves her expression far behind. She often leaves out letters from words from sentences, and does not tarry to finish her thought. Hence her letters and journals are often hard to make out. Miss Emerson to R.W.E. Waterford, Maine, April 13th, 1824. Quote, "Imagination will always revolt at the loss of the butterfly's beauty, and the rude waste of the rich dew of the welkin from its own azure cups. But be patient. There are many who are forced to creep through the entrails of reptiles and roots to find an infinite designer. Never dislike their little lobes and all their capacities to enjoy the raptures of sense, for they afford so much comfort to those who seek for analogies, and who are otherwise rather related to the amiable instincts of animals than to the lofty relations of reason and principle in the higher orders. The longer you live, the more you will have to endure the elementary existence of society, and your premature wisdom will distaste quiescence. And when the old become gay and the young grave at the portraiture of a fly and the Galen dissection of a flower, then you will find no necessary sacredness in the country. Nor did Milton, but his mind and his spirit were their own place, and came when he called them in the solitude of darkness. Solitude, which to people not talented to deviate from the beaten track, is the safe ground of mediocrity. Without offending is to learning and genius the only sure labyrinth, though sometimes gloomy, to form the eagle wing that will bear one farther than suns and stars. Byron and Wordsworth have their best and only intensely burnished their pens. Would to Providence your unfoldings might be there. that it were not a wild and fruitless wish that you would be disunited from traveling with the souls of other men, of living and breathing, reading and writing with one vital, time-sated idea, their opinions. So close with this conjunction that a certain pilgrim lived for some months in an eclipse so monotonous as scarcely to discern the disk of her own particular star. Could a mind return to its first fortunate seclusion, where it opened with its own peculiar colors and spread them out in its own rhythm palette, with its added stock, and spread them beneath the cross, what a mercy to the age! That religion so poetical, so philosophical, so adapted to unfold the understanding, when studied, where sublime sentiments and actions spring from the desire which genius always possesses of breaking those bounds which circumscribe the imagination. The heroism of morals, the enthusiasm of eloquence, the love of an eternal fame are supernatural enjoyments allotted only to minds which are at once exalted and melancholy, and wearied and disgusted with everything transitory and bounded. This disposition of mind is the source of every generous passion and philosophical discovery. Would this description of character, which I have copied from a glorious author, suit even our boasted Everett? Is he not completely enveloped in foreign matters and in an artificial character? I am glad that his notice has fallen on Edward, who will be for flinging his light on a civil profession rather than on another destiny. Those gospels of thought and wisdom, which you find so gossamer, 2 or 3 old books contain everything grand for me, yet you call this age the ripest. Where are its martyrs? Where was an age since Christianity when the public mind had less hold of the strongest of all truths? The mass will ever be in swaddlings, and there ever have been great minds, so I cannot see clearly the comparison between infancy and age. The arts are not equaled, and even Milton, casting an eye towards Ovid and Virgil, which seems less bearable than towards Homer. I would remind your grace, though but an abbess of a humble vale, that the triple bow was never seen before the deluge, nor is it a legend. There were no rains in those regions, or none heavy enow to give the binding of that flowery verge before the alteration the flood caused. St. Pierre favors this. Rich as in the triple bow of promise, and it has been seen bending on the grave of long-buried friendship, it would lose its best beauty, even in the commentators restoring it as a covenant bow were just. I am glad to spew out a scrap of learning to your science ship in revenge for your speaking of my moral scrawls and sibylline scraps. In truth, I have nothing of the old eld, but as many sands which I fear. The better part of the flattering letter I receive as a token of kindness. It was ingeniously done to write so well on my old almanacs, and I never rejected handsome compliment, for the only thing would occur to you what possible interest would any have in flattering me. Yet in solitude it is not necessary, as in society, where even the oars of life can hardly be kept in motion without. But if you tax me with any payment in the course of this letter, why, take it as debt or due to merit, for it is always passable in the best society. Ralph Waldo Emerson to Miss Emerson, April 30th, 1824. Is not life merely a sort of perpetual motion? One identical restlessness in all the individuals, but applied by the artist to many works, as steam will turn a spit or propel a man of war? Different trades thrive at different periods, and capital is converted occasionally from one to the other. 10 centuries ago, the human machines in Europe were all busy as wheels can be in killing man, destroying libraries, extirpating art, justice, and mercy. Today, with the same reckless activity, good is done. Books are written and read, useful and elegant institutions reared, manners are polished, and morals revered. Colleges take the place of schools, a sage of an hero. German, Saxon, Hun, Dane, in dusty gowns and darkened cloisters, by an odd revolution of fortune, are at this moment exploring with critical acumen the rude antiquity, the manners, origin, and war-path of their ancestors, and evincing, it may be, as much intrepidity and unconquerable pride in pedant argument as did their forefathers when they clashed their buckets in the tented field. No change of manners leaves heaven without a witness, and Luterprand and St. Gregory and St. etc. are represented today by Dr. Channing, Dr. Chalmers, etc. But for the cannibal Saracens have come up critical scholars. For Paynim giants locking their dungeons have come up Howards, opening their dungeon doors. The use of the safety lamp, of the compass, and of the press supersede the talismans and charlatanry of superstition. For Attila has come Wilberforce, and for Alaric, Franklin. The religious spirit was the excess of that day, and Europe has depopulated in 7 unsuccessful crusades. Spirit of liberty is the fashion of this age, and we have had our unsuccessful crusades. Naples, Spain, and Greece are the coveted holy lands of modern chivalry. I am glad to remark how much more reason is the friend of our hopes than of theirs. Is man the result of men, or a mushroom exotic in every land? Was Dr. Franklin, one of the most sensible men that ever lived, as likely to be born elsewhere as at Boston and in 17 blank? Don't you admire, I am not sure you do, the serene and powerful understanding which was so eminently practical and useful, which grasped the policy of the globe and the form of a fly, which, with like felicity and ease, which seemed to be a transmigration of the genius of Socrates, yet more useful, more moral, and more pure, and a living contradiction of the buffoonery that mocked a philosophy in the clouds? Franklin was no seraphic doctor, no verbal gladiator clad in complete mail of syllogisms, but a sage who used his pen with a dignity and effect which was new, and had been supposed to belong only to the sword. He was a man of that singular force of mind, with which in the course of Providence so few men are gifted, which seems designed to effect by individual influence what is ordinarily done by the slow and secret work of institutions and national growth. One enjoys a higher conception of human worth in measuring the vast influence exercised on men's minds by Franklin's character than even by reading books of remote ages. Homer has indeed triumphed over time, but a poem is at best a work of art, and is seen ever in the same cold eyes that survey a marble statue or Italian painting. Whoever found, of all the generations of the readers of Homer, where is the madcap? That his conduct in life was ruled or biased one moment after merry boyhood by the blind bard's genius? I own I have read somewhere, perchance in Foster's Essays, such an opinion avowed, but it smacked of extravagance then and smacks now. That many millions have already lived and millions are now alive who have felt through their whole lives in powerful good effect both of Franklin's actions and his writings. His subtle observation, his seasonable wit, his profound reason, and his mild and majestic virtues made him idolized in France, feared in England, and obeyed in America. Providence seemed to send him in our honor of need, qualified extraordinarily for the extraordinary service. Nor is it easy to limit the fame of the influence of those who thus mightily act on society. His good offices reach through 1,000 years to posterity unborn, who will bless the builders of this Doric temple of liberty. Moses and Aaron, priests and Levites, led out the people into the appointed land, but long after, God appointed a wise king, the wisest of men, to settle the foundations of civil prosperity and erect an altar to himself. May 2nd, 1824. It puzzles and mortifies the bounding spirit to be brought so soon to a goal. A choice of 3 professions, in either of which but a small portion of time is professedly devoted to the analysis of those high relations which unite us to God, and those inexplicably curious cords that fasten us to matter. Men's creeds can never, at least in youth, set the heart entirely at ease. They strike the eye ever and anon as fine-spun textures through which the rebellious doubt is impatient, sometimes desperate to plunge. There is a dreaminess about my mode of life, which may be a depravity, which loosens the tenacity of what should be most tenacious, this my grasp on heaven and earth. I am the servant more than the master of my fates. They seem to lead me into many a slough where I do not better than despond. And as to the life I lead, and the works and the days, I should blush to recite the unprofitable account. but prophets and philosophers assure me that I am immortal, and sometimes my own imagination goes into a fever with its hopes and conceptions. Tell me, my soul, if this be true, if these indolent days and frivolous nights, these insignificant accomplishments, this handful of thought, this pittance of virtues are to form my trust and claim on an existence as imperishable as my Maker's. There is no such thing accorded to the universal prayer of man as satisfactory knowledge. Metaphysics teach me admirably well what I knew before, setting out in order particular after particular, bone after bone, the anatomy of the mind. My knowledge is thus arranged, not augmented. Morals, too, the proud science which departs at once from the lower creation about which most of a man's philosophy is conversant, and professes to deal with the sublimest connections and separate destiny. Morals are chiefly occupied in discriminating between what is general and what is partial, or in tying rules together by a thread which is called a system or a principle. But neither metaphysics nor ethics are more than outside sciences. They give me no insight into the nature and design of my being, and the profoundest scholar in them both is as far from any clue to the being and the work behind the scenes as the Scythian or the Mohawk. For morals and metaphysics, Cudworth and Locke may be both true, and every system of religion yet offered to man wholly false. To glowing hope, moreover, 'tis alarming to see the full and regular series of animals from mites and worms up to man. Yet he who has the same organization and a little more mind pretends to an insulated and extraordinary destiny, to which his fellows of the stall and field are in no particular admitted, nay, are disdainfully excluded. But for myself, woe is me. These poor and barren thoughts are the best in my brain. Quote, the glow that in my spirit dwelt is fluttering faint and low. I am ambitious not to live in a corner, or, which is tenfold perdition, to be contemptible in a corner. Meantime my prospect is no better. My soul is dark, or is dead. I will hope, quote, she is not dead, but sleepeth, end quote. Here follows a short poem called Asia. Sleep on, ye drowsy tribes whose old repose the roaring oceans of the east enclose. Old Asia, nurse of man and bower of gods, the dragon tyranny with crown and ball chants to thy dreams his ancient lullaby. Emerson writes a Letter to Plato. The voice of antiquity has proclaimed, most venerable shade, that if the father of the gods should converse with men, he would speak in the language of Plato. In cloisters and colleges, lovers of philosophy are found to this day who repeat this praise. But the revolution of ages has introduced other tongues into the world, and the dialect of Attica is well nigh forgotten. Rome succeeded to the honors of Greece, Italy, France, and England to the power and refinement of Rome, and the children of the proud republicans who disgraced Xerxes, defied Asia, and instructed all Europe, are now cooped up in a corner of their patrimony, making a desperate stand for their lives against a barbarous nation whose bondmen they have been. In these circumstances, the pillars of the porch have been broken, and the groves of the academy felled to the ground. I may add that I live in a land which you alone prophesied to your contemporaries, where is founded a political system more wise and successful than Utopia or the Atlantis. You have now dwelled in the land of souls upwards of 20 centuries, and in the meantime mightier changes than those to which I have already alluded have appeared on earth. I have no design to interrupt your serene repose with the weary annals of political convulsion. These were always alike, and the fortunes of ages may be told from an infancy as brief as man's life. The desperate state of the Greek Republic concerns me not. It has long ceased to touch yourself. I write of higher revolutions and vaster communities. I write of the moral and religious condition of man. As the world has grown older, the theory of life has grown better, while a correspondent improvement in practice has not been observed. 1800 years ago, a revelation came down from heaven which distinctly declared of the leading principles of ethics, and that in so clear and popular a form that the very terms in which they were conveyed served the most illiterate as well as the great and wise for a manual, a rule of life. The book which contains this divine message has done more than any other to sap the authority, I might say to sweep away the influence, of Socrates and his disciple. Men still commend your wisdom, for indeed, Plato, thou reasonest well, but Christ and his apostles infinitely better, not through thy fault, but through their inspiration. Thus a religious revolution has taken place in the midst of civilized nations, more radical and extensive than any other which ever came, be it religious, scientific, or political. Men are now furnished with creeds, animated by all the motives a gospel offers, and they look back with pity on the proud attainments of the pagan Plato and his emulous successors, and around upon the living pagan nations of the East and West. This dispensation of the Supreme Being is expounded and enforced to all classes of men by a regular priesthood. That priesthood finds riddles in their vocation hard to solve, wonders not easy to digest. They examine with curious inquiry public annals and private anecdotes of your age to ascertain the just level to which human virtue had then arisen, to find how general were integrity, temperance, and charity, to find how much the gods were reverenced, and then to compare accurately the result with the known condition of modern Europe and America. For it is not believed possible, by those living under the influence of such news and puissant principles as our gospel hath erected, that any high standard could have obtained the thought or actions under the patronage of your gaudy and indecent idolatry. But now and then a scholar whose midnight lamp is regularly lit to unfold your spirit appeals from the long mythology which the poets forged to your lofty long speculations on the nature of the gods and the obligations to virtue which Christianity hath rather outstripped than contradicted. When a scholar appeals from that to these, for these are true belief of good men, your contemporaries, he is told that the mass of men regarded your pages as fine-spun theories, unsanctioned, unpractical, untrue, that you, Plato, did not know if there were many gods or but one, that you inculcated the observance of the vulgar superstitions of the day. If the law of the universe admitted of exception, and it were allowed me to depart to you your refulgent shores and commune with Plato, this is the information I should seek at your hands. How could those parts of the social machine whose consistency and just action depends entirely upon the morality and religion sown and grown in the community, how could these be kept in safe and efficient arrangement under a system which, besides being frivolous, was the butt of vulgar ridicule? Is it necessary that men should have before them the strong excitement of religion and its thrilling motives? One who was accustomed to constant pressure of their yoke would pronounce it indispensable. It was so specially made for man and blends so intimately with his nature and habits that it is difficult for the believer to conceive of unbelief. Nay, the influence seems to spread a great deal wider and to affect all those who belong to a religious country, though the predominance of these feelings be no part of their character. But 'tis very possible that this may be illusory, and it seems to me if we study the particular action making up the aggregate which we call character, and abandon generalities, we shall find that there is a great self-deception practiced daily in society, where gospels are premulged, and that the proneness of men to judge of themselves by their best moments, combining with that unqualified approbation which every moral being must needs yield to a system so pure, leads men to suspect that the deeds they do from a broad view of their interest, they do from religious motives and a powerful bias to virtue. It is a favorite point, Plato, with our divines, to argue from the misery and vice anciently prevalent in the world, a certain necessity of the revelation. Of this revelation I am the ardent friend. Of the being who sent it I am the child, and I trust I am disposed from reason and affection with the whole force of my understanding, the warmth of my heart, and the constant attention of all my life to practice the duties there enjoined, and to help its diffusion throughout the globe. But I confess it has not for me the same exclusive and extraordinary claims that it has for many. I hold reason to be a prior revelation, and that they do not contradict each other. I conceive that the Creator addresses his messages to the minds of his children, and will not mock them by acting upon their moral character by means of motives which are wild and unintelligible to them. The assent which fear and superstition shall extort from them to words or rites or reasons which they do not understand, since it makes a ruin of the mind, can please none but a cruel and malicious divinity. The belief of such a God and such a sublime depravity is absurd. His house is divided against itself. His house, his universe, cannot stand. The errand which the true God sends, which men have hoped to receive, which philosophers waited for in your porches and schools, must be worthy of him, or it will be rejected as a mountebank's tales and wonders. What we do not apprehend, we first admire and then ridicule. Therefore I scout all these parts of the book which are reckoned mysteries. But one of the greatest of these is of external rather than internal character, by which the revelation is made but a portion of a certain great scheme planned from eternity in heaven to be slowly developed on earth. It is made essential to the economy of providence and necessary to the welfare of man. I need not inform you in all its depraved details of the theology under whose chains Calvin and Geneva bound Europe down, but this opinion, that the revelation had become necessary to the salvation of men through some conjunction of events in heaven, is one of its vagaries. This is one which, from whatever cause, has lingered in men's minds after the rest of that family of errors disappeared. And sober and sensible theologians speak of the ages preceding the event as a long preparation for it, and of the whole history of man as only relative to it. The cases are so few in which we can see connection and order in events, by reason of the narrow field of our vision, that we are glad in our vanity if we can solder with our imagination into a system things in fact unconnected, can turn the ravishment of devotion or poetry into prophecies, by searching up and down in the great garner of history for an event that will chime with a prediction. Emerson mentions the Greeks. The Grecian genius did not start into life with the victories of Salamis and Plataea, but was born and disciplined before Homer sang. Emerson writes of America. When this country is censured for its foolhardy ambition to take a stand in its green years among old and proud nations, it is no reproach and no disqualification to be told, but you have no literature. It is admitted we have none, but we have what is better. We have a government and a national spirit that is better than poems or histories, and these have a premature ripeness that is incompatible with the rapid production of the latter. We should take shame to ourselves as sluggish and Brodian if there were righteously said that we had done nothing for ourselves, neither in learning nor arts, nor government, nor political economy. But we see and feel that in the space of 2 generations, this nation has taken such a start as already to outstrip the bold freedom of modern speculation, which ordinarily, universally for this case, is considerably in advance of practice. No man calls Mr. Hume an old-fashioned and short-sighted politician, yet many pages of his history have lost their credit already by their practical confutation of their principles. 'Tis no disgrace to tell Newton he is no poet, nor America even. Emerson writes of manners. Pericles, Caesar, Chesterfield, Henry IV of France. It certainly is worth one's while who considers that sway elegant manners bear in society, and how wealth, genius, and moral worth, all extrinsic and intrinsic good in men, do in society feel their empire. It becomes a clear command of reason to cultivate them. There are some men, wittily called nature's gentlemen, who need no discipline, but grow straight up into shape and grace, and can match the proudest in dignified demeanor and the gentlest in courtesy. Of these the line in the old song is 1,000 times quoted, quote, "My face is my fortune, sir," she said, end quote. I speak here of no transient success in trying a neckcloth aright, and making a fashionable bow, and speaking in the precise nick of time, and the just length, but of manners of a sensible man when they become the chief channel in which a man's senses runs. Of those which are the plain index of fine sense and fine feelings, which impress all and offend none. The specimens of this sort are to be searched for in the summits of society, for these manners are invariably successful, or among the young, not yet advanced. They had better be observed in youth, for there is nothing in art or nature so charming as the brilliant manners of one of these candidates for eminence before adulation has got to be an old song with him, while hope and love dazzle him. Their address is marked by an alacrity of manner, arising from elasticity of spirits and of limbs that no eye can watch unmoved. The spectacle these afford is a perfect tonic in its physical effect, like light or like wine. It imparts an impulse of cheerfulness not easily withstood to all within their influence. It effaces for a moment the omnipresent consciousness of sin, sickness, sorrow. It is an attractive subject. Quote, "Many men," said Montaigne, "I have known of supercelestial opinions and subterranean manners." End quote. Manners is a fourth fine art, and like painting, poetry, and sculpture, is founded on fiction. It is a mask worn by men of sense to deceive the vulgar, ape the conduct of every superior intelligence. Thus I know models who affect to drop carelessly the most subtle wit or profound thought. Every virtue is spoken of with respect, even those to which their private life bears little love. Every event is treated with exact measure of interest, sickness and death, a balloon and a butterfly being discussed with the same cool philosophy. In the practice of these wise masters, I know different theories of manners prevail, and are as many as the systems of philosophy. For this is a species of second philosophy, and may be termed the philosophy of life. Thus, the sect of the Stoics will have their mannerists who would command in good company by inflexible reception of good and ill. Democritus has many, even Heraclitus a few. Socrates has some disciples who use plain speech and practical as J.L., but the predominant sect are those who hold fast with the Epicureans, independent and good-humored. Emerson talks now of books. Apart from the vastness of transitory volumes which occasional politics or 1,000 ephemeral magnalia elicit, there is another sort of book which appears now and then in the world, once in 2 or 3 centuries perhaps, and which soon or late gets a foothold in popular esteem. I allude to those books which collect and embody the wisdom of their times, and so mark the stages of human improvement. Such are the Proverbs of Solomon, the Essays of Montaigne, and eminently the Essays of Bacon. Such also, though in my judgment in far less degree, is the proper merit of Mr. Pope's judicious poems, the moral essays, and essays on man, which, without originality, seize upon all the popular speculations floating among sensible men, and give them in a compact graceful form to the following age. I should like to add another volume to this valuable work. I am not so foolhardy as to write "sequel to Bacon" on my title page, and there are some reasons that induce me to suppose that the undertaking of this enterprise does not imply any censurable arrogance. It may be made clear that there may be the wisdom of an age, independent of and above the wisdom of any individual whose life is numbered in its years, and the diligence rather than the genius of one mind may compile the prudential maxims, domestic and public maxims current in the world, and which may be made to surpass the single stores of any writer, as the richest private funds are quickly exceeded by a public purse. Conclusion. Why has my motley diary no jokes? Because it is a soliloquy, and every man is grave alone. 1. There is no royal road to learning. 2. Let not your virtue be of the written or spoken sort, but of the practiced. 3. The 2 chief differences among men, touching the talents, consist 1. In the different degrees of attention they are able to command, 2. In the unlike expression they give to the same ideas. 4. There is time enough for every business men are really resolved to do. 5. Obsta principiis, take heed of getting cloyed with that honeycomb which flattery tempts with. 'Tis apt to blunt the edge of appetite for many wholesome viands, and rob you of many days of health. Let no man flatter himself with the hope of true good or solid enjoyment from the study of Shakespeare or Scott. Enjoy them as recreation. You cannot please yourself by going to stare at the moon. 'Tis beautiful when in your course it comes. And this is the end of Volume 1 of the Journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thank you for listening.